If anyone has ground to stand on when it comes to questioning mainstream science and the narratives we're told within it, it's nuclear physicist turned audio alchemist, Dr. Stephen A. Young. After spending nearly 2 decades studying quantum physics, Steve realized that most of quantum physics wasn't applicable to real life, and the principles within it hadn't been used to change anyone's real world experience. A lot of quantum physics is just theories and ideas and can't be proven, disproven, or really challenged because it's all ideological. After moving himself out of this scientific paradigm that really didn't seem to have any real world application, he discovered alchemy and the idea of merging science and spirit and soul. This completely transformed how he not only saw his place here on Earth, but the music he was creating and the audio alchemy he was engaging in. This conversation dives into what inspired him to write his book, A Fool's Wisdom, that starts to unravel a lot of the scientific conspiracies that we are currently living within, why he felt inspired to share this with the world, and how he believes we are all alchemists engaging in alchemy all the time. Today's conversation was not only inspiring, but also felt like we are now on the precipice of carving a new path forward when it comes to science and scientific inquiry, and really challenging the ideas that are keeping us from becoming our superhuman selves and playing small in this life. When we start to merge science with spirituality, which is an ancient concept, we really start to unlock the parts of ourselves that have been stifled through materialism and reductionist thinking. Steve provides us with a very grounded, very practical way of stepping into this next frontier. And I'm so glad to be able to share this conversation. And for anyone interested in checking his music out, it's Headflux on Spotify, which I will link in the show notes. I have today with me Stephen Young, who is the author of A Fool's Wisdom, Science Conspiracies, and The Secret Art of Alchemy. And I'm really excited about this conversation today, Steve, because for me, you are somebody that has this really unique ability to take seemingly incredibly complex topics, and I think they've been made to seem incredibly complex intentionally, but you have the ability to really distill them down into almost like a story-like form where they're incredibly understandable and in many cases almost funny to listen to the stories around some of these really complicated scientific ideas that we've been fed in our conventional scientific paradigms. So I'm excited to talk about your book and to talk about you, because if anyone has the ability to break these types of topics down, it's you. You are a nuclear physicist. You have your PhD in quantum physics, and you have spent a lot of time in the conventional scientific systems as well as disentangling yourself from that, and are, now very much approaching science and the study of life, from what I can tell, from a more holistic or alchemical perspective. So if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how you were able to sort of take yourself out of this system that you had spent so much time in and dedicated so much of your educational life to.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Well, you used the right word there, which was distill. I think, this process of like distillation of information and knowledge, it's a lengthy process. It takes time. People often ask, when I was at university, was I aware of the problems with what I was being taught? And the answer is no, I wasn't at all. I trusted it completely. I, was just, and of course you're kind of on a track, when you're at university, you're kind of on a railroad, if you like. So you don't really have time to test everything that you're being taught. You have to just kind of take it on trust and keep moving on to the next thing. But, it's been over 20 years since I finished my PhD now. And, I've lived a lot, and I came away from that system. I kind of detached myself from it. And, just through the various experiences I've had in life and the research I was doing independently, I gradually just came to realize that a lot of the theories that I'd been taught didn't really stand up or seem to produce any fruits in the real world. Like I was looking for what did these theories produce in the world? And the more I looked into that question, I started coming to the realization that they haven't produced anything. A lot of it is just purely pedagogical, made up for the purposes of teaching and, academia, but not actually like a useful skill that leads to anything in the world. So it was kind of on that basis of really looking for what are the applications of these theories that I started to realize maybe there are no applications, and we've been kind of misled.
And as far as so in the, I'll say spiritual realms or spiritual communities, I think this word of quantum gets thrown around a lot because it is almost this catch-all term that can be used to throw at something that can't be easily explained. And it's like, if something is quantum, there's really no sense in questioning it too much because you can't quantify it. There are so many aspects of quantum theories that we really can't test, and we can't reproduce the science around it. And it is very theoretical. But you have broken this down. I saw one of the talks that you did that's available on your website, and you did this breakdown of, some of the erroneous thinking inside of this idea of quantum theory and quantum physics. And in that, what is your feeling around how pervasive this term is now being used as far as this blanket term to kind of encompass anything that is difficult to understand?
Yeah, that's it. It's like a scientific word for everything that mystical. It is really a mystical science, a kind of mysticism. In fact, Michio Kaku, a famous theoretical physicist, he even said that quantum physics is based on Jewish mysticism or the Zoroastrian tradition or whatever. So it does have its origins in mysticism, and it's a very mystical science, and we don't really expect that from science. Science is usually much more like practical and hands-on and real. I mean, you're a dentist, right? So you're like working with teeth, very hands-on, very practical, very, useful because everyone has teeth and everyone needs dentistry. But here with this quantum physics, very impractical, very theoretical, very mystical, existing in a dimension. And when I say dimension, I mean scale, like dimension. So it's in a very, very small dimension that is beyond all technology or human senses and everything else. So it was appealing to me because I was kind of this young guy. I was like into sci-fi and the mysteries of the universe and all that kind of thing. And I loved the idea of like looking into the depths of the universe, like using mathematics. But, again, the thing is, I didn't really realize the problems with quantum physics until, decades later, really 2 decades later, I suppose, when I really started looking into this. And I had approached it with the same kind of approach I took during COVID, which was to look for proof of the isolation of the thing that we're talking about. So like with the virus, like looking for proof of virus isolation. Well, I thought, what about isolation of atoms? What about isolation of the electron? What about isolation of molecules? I started looking into this because I'd done so much theoretical study into these things, but I'd never seen one. An atom or an electron or a molecule. And I thought, if I've never seen one, I'd assume there are people in laboratories out there who are actually like working with them in a hands-on way or whatever. But the more I looked into it, I'm like, no, it's like a theoretical, the atoms and molecules are in the heads of the people. But what's actually happening in the real world is like a chemist, for example, will be working with salts and liquids, right? They're not working with molecules. They're working with salts. The molecule is like it's like an encoding of the recipe used to make the substance, right? It's like the details of what's in the substance and the recipe is kind of written into this molecular formula. But I couldn't find any evidence of the actual existence of molecules. And, so this then, I started thinking, okay, well, if this is all theoretical, where does it come from? And so I started looking into like the philosophy of quantum physics, because I realized that actually theories are born from philosophies. Like people tend to have a belief system or a creed before they have a theory. It's like the theory is born out of a particular way of seeing things or a particular belief system. And, this goes back to like ancient atomism, because the belief in atoms goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. And there's a whole bunch of stuff about them and how they came up with that and everything. And it's a very specific, it basically all comes from a philosophy in which there's no God. And so what I traced it back to is like, for the earliest, the atomists, it was all about eliminating the human soul, eliminating God, eliminating spirit, eliminating karma or sin. All these things were basically pushed out and replaced by this thing called the atom, which is like an idol almost, which was used to explain everything, like how the universe is made, what everything's made of, all comes from atoms. And then all the spirituality was kind of like put aside or thrown out. And, I was coming into spiritual awareness myself through reading spiritual books and having spiritual experiences. And it just became more and more clear that the science I was fed could not explain any of this, like not even close. It was a fundamentally non-spiritual, materialistic science. And so, that's what kind of led me, kept me seeking. And eventually I found alchemy, which is an ancient science which doesn't reject spirituality. It's science and spirituality together as a cohesive whole. So this was a wonderful thing to discover, and I found it very inspiring, and I became like a alchemy enthusiast, which I still am.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you just brought up, like the parallels between what you have been looking into in physics and science as a whole and what we saw, during COVID, during the pandemic. And that idea that, there are so many stories like and you touch on this in your book, but the germ theory story that everyone just accepts. And for the most part, even if you're in these professions and you're in these scientific worlds, you accept or believe that somebody out there must have done the work that would be foundational for us to all learn and believe these things. And it is really just this like initiation into self-responsibility for your own belief systems, your own personal and professional development, and your own understanding of the world and of your place here, when you start to actually realize, no, these are just, in many cases, just stories. And, completely, as you said, like ideologically based. So there was some, in the case of the atom, this idea that there is this godless universe and soulless form of existence, and we should, idolize the atom as a result of it. And that's kind of been now impregnated into science across the board. And, a very similar thing was done with these invisible particles and, viruses and these types of things that sort of parallel what was done in physics in other areas of science like biology. So it's really interesting that there are just so many stories that have been made up, essentially, and then woven into the fabric of what we call science. And we all want to believe in the science and trust the science. And it is really humbling to step outside of that and realize that in many cases, there's no basis aside from an idea that somebody who is now, venerated, came up with, just made it up.
Yeah, to think about, like, because it's been a long time. I mean, you're talking like 100 years or more that these ideas have been sort of like percolating in academia and then like filtering out through the media, through, television programming, movies, and, news media and stuff like that as well, where we've just been getting more and more familiar with these ideas, like viruses, for example. I was in a situation with viruses where I'd never had a virus, right? I'd never had a doctor tell me that I had a virus, right? So that's a different thing. A lot of people, they go to the doctor all the time and they'll get told they have a virus. And they're just like, okay, I've got a virus. And then they just start saying, I have a virus. So I've got this virus. I've got this. But I'd never had a virus, right? I'd never had a doctor tell me that I had a virus. So yeah, I was like, I really need to look into this virus thing and see what it's all about. And when I realized that a virus is a theoretical construct, I mean, it wasn't really that surprising to me because I was trained in theoretical physics. And so I knew that a huge amount of science is just theoretical. And it was, I was a little bit surprised to learn that viruses were not visible or, had never been isolated. But it was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's the theoretical portion of biology, as it were. Just like we have theoretical physics, practical physics. Well, there's theoretical biology and practical biology as well. And they've been so kind of blended together now that it's hard for people to separate what is actual true practical science that has been tested versus what is a story or an idea or an ideology. It all just kind of got so mixed up. So really my main kind of intention with the book was to actually just peel apart the theory from the reality. So this was with the alchemy, like focusing on the elements, fire, earth, air, and water, which I think once you really start to embody the teachings of the four elements, it starts to pull you away from all that theoretical stuff and, help you to see it for what it is. So, yeah, that was kind of what really inspired the book. The COVID thing, I mean, they say it was a terrible time, but there were some silver linings. I met a lot of great people, like-minded people who are like good friends now. And I was inspired to write my book, and I probably would have never done any of that if it wasn't for COVID. So.
Yeah. And your practice or your study of alchemy, when did you sort of start to dive into that and then really look at it as a more practical way to understand the world?
Yeah, well, I started looking into it about, I guess, 2013, 2014, around about then. And I came up with something called audio alchemy. I came up with the term audio alchemy to describe a technique of making music in an alchemical way. So taking like the teachings of alchemy and basically applying it to the process of making music. And I did this because, well, for two reasons. Firstly, because I knew that music making was a transformative process, that when you actually create something from beginning to end, you change. You change in the process. Like your creativity, actually, you're creating yourself while you're creating your art as well. And, alchemy, we talk about that. The alchemists would believe that while they were doing their work, they were working on themselves at the same time. So it brought together this idea that like creativity and scientific work is also personal development work, is also a soul development work. It can be all as one together. That's why I came up with audio alchemy. But then I realized all the processes in chemistry, like the 7 processes from alchemy and the elements and the principles and all that, I realized they all apply to music as well. So for everything in chemistry, there's like a corresponding thing in music. And there is this kind of like link between chemistry and music. And so, yeah, I did my best to define that as best I could. And I was teaching people audio alchemy in retreats and workshops during from 2015 through to 2020 or so. So that was my first thought of it. It was like, wow, alchemy is a general science that can be applied to any type of work. And they call it the work, actually, or the great work, because it is applicable to any kind of human endeavor.
Yeah, and it's considerate of and reliant upon, from my understanding, the soul and the spirit, as well as the practical or physical elements that allow you to kind of bind all of that into a much more holistic way of looking at what science actually is, which is, how do we imbue life with the different things that can be manipulated or maneuvered within it, And then it's more practical in the sense that you don't have to have all of these theories and, invisible either particles or theoretical structures to understand how to alchemically transmute something or transform something. So, in your work and in your studying of it, how do you feel? You mentioned that you were able to infuse it within your music and sound alchemy or audio alchemy for people, for regular people who are maybe understanding that science is just, the science that we're currently learning is inaccessible, or it almost seems overwhelmingly impractical. What are some ways that you think alchemy can be used for just the regular person to better understand the world and then also create and materialize within their world the things that they would hope to in a really practical way?
Well, I usually take the example to get like really down to earth for like everyday people. The first thing to realize is that the kitchen is your alchemy lab, right? Who invented kitchens, right? It's like the kitchens were invented by alchemists, of course, right? Like all your pots and pans are different kinds of crucibles. Your cooker and your oven are for channeling the fire element. So an alchemist would have a forge, which is, the place where he can like channel create fire and sustain fire and control the fire element, because to transform things, you need to have control of the fire element. You need to be able to create a certain amount of heat and sustain it for a certain amount of time, right? And we do this when we're cooking and producing foods and so on. So I use the very simple example of like making a cup of tea, which uses 4 steps of alchemy and uses all 4 elements. So you take, for example, the tea leaves. Well, the tea leaves need to be harvested from the plant, and they need to be dried. So drying is the operation of fire. You need to dry leaves to remove the water from them by applying the fire. And then once you have the dry leaves, you can then, you have the hot water. You can then put your leaves in the water to extract the essence of the tea. Now, this is the water element. It's the application of water to the tea. And this takes the essences and the flavors into the water. And that's dissolution. And then we then use separation to remove the tea bag and the tea leaves from the tea at that point, because we don't want that to be in the final product. So separation is the third process of alchemy. And then we then bring together other components, say it's honey or milk with the tea, and stir it all together to make this cup of tea, right? And that's called conjunction, which is the bringing together of separate elements and making them into a new thing. So, even just in the process of making your morning tea or coffee or whatever it is, you are actually using the 4 elements, and you're using alchemical processes or chemistry processes. So, the kitchen is really the place where we do like home alchemy. And my wife is really great at making products from the herbs in the garden. She'll make like balms and medicines and tinctures and hydrosols and all that kind of stuff. It's really recognizing that in the plant life and the stuff that is given to us by God and by nature, there is gold in there, right? Not metal gold, but gold in the sense of purity, like pure useful material in all of the plants. And the alchemists were the first to really learn how to like extract that and to process it and work it to make it into medicine. So that's, another one of the ways you can sort of take your alchemy up. I mean, cooking is one level, but then like making medicine from herbs would be like another level to it. And then, if you're actually involved in a creative process like making music or sculpture or painting or anything like that, you'll find that all the alchemy applies very well to those processes as well. So it's like really starting to see how it applies to everyday life. How all your organs and your body all serve different alchemical processes. You're doing alchemy inside your body. You're doing alchemy in your work. If you're doing any kind of harmonizing or refurbishing or like cleaning a space. We always think that cleaning is like this lowly job, right? But it's one of the most important jobs in the world, like to keep things clean, to like harmonize spaces, to like organize things. Like, keeping a clean space is an act, is an alchemical process. And it's just this everyday thing that we take totally for granted. So yeah, it's like kind of allowing it to come into your life and recognizing where it's at play and all the different things that you do. It's not some technical science that's like inaccessible or impractical. It's actually so practical that you do it every day without even realizing it.
So we're all, in a way, alchemists in our own lives, if we can look at it that way. And, that idea that we're all capable of, and we're all, to some degree engaging in forms of alchemy throughout our day, but it's been just so rewritten or unwritten out of our experience here on Earth and what, this place is and what our purpose here is, that it seems, I think for a lot of people, it's probably not even a word within their vocabulary because of that, intentional disengagement with, how do you practically work these things throughout your life? And you had mentioned that you developed this form of audio alchemy, and that changed your music and the way that you were developing music. Could you speak to that a little bit? Like, how did the principles of alchemy, as you infuse them into making music, change the type of music you were making, or maybe how you felt about being creative in that way?
Yes, I mean, it changed my whole approach to music, like in terms of like how I viewed like what it is that I'm doing. Because in the beginning, I didn't really understand. I mean, I knew I loved music and I knew I wanted to do it. But, as I then started getting into it, I'm like, what am I doing? What's really going on here? What is this? What's happening here? But with the alchemy, it took me back to the original science, which is about healing and about the human soul. We talked about the soul earlier. So I didn't even know what the soul was. I never even heard of the soul through science, right? I heard about it through music. Right? People singing soul music, people singing about my soul. Oh, my soul is free or whatever, singing songs about the soul. I'm like, what is this soul thing that everyone's like singing about, and why didn't I learn about that at university? So, this put me on a path of like soul seeking, right? So like trying to like find yourself, like what is my soul kind of thing. And this comes to like, your purpose, finding out what your purpose is and what moves you and drives you and what makes you unique and everything. And, again, that's all that stuff is totally antithetical to, standard scientific training, right? It's like, because they've completely knocked the soul out of the whole thing. So it's like this kind of inward journey of, bringing out what's inside of you. So I would just approach my music with the awareness that I was doing alchemy and understanding the different processes I was using in an alchemical sense. And applying it like in the 7 steps, a 7-step process and all this. Yeah. And really just teaching people, I was just trying to teach people about alchemy and music together as a single sort of thing to try and give them a bigger context for what they're doing when they're making music. It's not just, you're not the first person to make music, right? I mean, the alchemists were making music hundreds of years ago, right? They didn't have computers and stuff, but, they had instruments, and music was a very important part of being an alchemist. They said it was like defense against bad spirits and this kind of thing. They would use music to keep away bad spirits and to keep their spirits high and all that kind of stuff. And to give reverence and for prayer, songs for carrying prayers and all that kind of stuff. So music's been very important for a long time. And, alchemists were big into it. Yeah.
And your music, your I guess stage name, if that's the correct way to say it, is Headflux, correct?
Headflux, yep.
And it's electronic music primarily that you make?
Yeah, it has been as Headflux, it was DJ music. I started out in the rave scene, and actually to go back to your last question. So what sort of changed in my relationship to music was it did become more about healing rather than just entertainment or partying. And, this was a shift that happened. I started getting into 432 hertz music instead of the 440. And when I made that shift and when I started getting into alchemy, it did, my whole music career changed. I started getting invited to more events that were about healing, like ecstatic dance events and stuff like that, rather than these sort of like raging, parties or whatever. It was like now it was like people who were looking for a healing experience on the dance floor, right? And so yeah, the whole just kind of approach to music and the responsibility of what it means to be a musician, to like have a dance floor in front of you and to be controlling the frequencies for all these people, the responsibility that entails, and how you do have to, take it seriously and give them the best frequencies with the most resonance. And that's how you get people to have like the healing experience, the intention, the resonance, all this. It's not just a case of blasting out the latest banger for people's entertainment. I started taking it much more seriously as a kind of therapeutic, like healing sort of practice.
Yeah, and I would say my own personal experience. So I've listened to your music, and it, like, for me, what I can feel in it. And this is going to sound like maybe a little bit of a strange description, but it almost feels like there's like this fluidity or this like warmth that goes through my body when I hear the music that's done in 432 hertz versus, just listening to, as you said, like a banger that you would hear at a rave or a party. There is something that just feels like it's merging or it's flowing into my body, and it feels very like that sound is almost like holding me. Like there's a space that gets created for support, almost, is the best way I think I could put it. So there's definitely something that for me in my body feels different between, for example, the music you're making versus something that you would, commonly hear on the radio or on like a top 100 chart.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense with what I experienced as well. So, because for a lot of years, I had some music in 432, but all my previous music was in 440. So a lot of the time I would show up to DJ sets and I would be playing some music in 432 and some of it in 440, kind of mixing it together. And so I would pay attention to like how it would affect people. And, what I noticed was the 440 stuff is more, like I say, more raging. Like people would be more like, like with their fists and, their eyes pumping. They're like, yeah, like really super excited, like wild, But then in 432, I noticed people would be like, they'd have their eyes closed and their hands in like the prayer position and stuff like that. They'd be having a much more internal, quiet experience rather than this like whooping and cheering and all like, yeah, this kind of crazy behavior. And, to get people like that, the thing is like to get people like really like hyped up and eyes popping out their heads and everything, it's actually distortion that causes that, right? It's like most of the big music now, the big music events, like the heavily distorted music, like with lots of like dissonant tones, and people are screaming and shouting. And it's like, it's manic, right? It's because of the distortion in the music. But when you actually make it like all like harmonic and properly, all the waves joined together properly, and it's all like clean and harmonic, people tend to just close their eyes and go within, and they're not like whooping and cheering and punching the air and all that kind of stuff. So, that was my experience. Nowadays my sets are all in 432, but I'd say for a lot of years I was playing both, and I would definitely notice a difference. Do
you know of, or have you played any events that are like where all of the music is in 432?
No, I don't think so. Unless it was only me playing at the event. But although I was at Confluence, Confluence Festival a couple of months ago, and I think most of the artists performing there were in 432, but I'm not sure if it was all. It's not always practical for certain types of artists to do 432. It can be quite difficult, but if you're electronic, it's easy to do, but if you're playing with instruments and stuff like that, sometimes you have to just go with the tuning that you have. Yeah.
And do you think that your training as a physicist, and I'll say nuclear physicist because I think that was your thesis, your PhD thesis, correct? It was
PhD, yeah.
yeah. Does that, I mean, I know you're sort of removed from that world now, but do you think that that played at all into the kind of music you're now making or the art and the alchemy that you're creating now?
Yes, I mean, it very much has made me who I am today. I wouldn't have written a book. For a start, I wouldn't have written a book if I didn't have my PhD. I try to imagine like in a parallel universe, if I didn't get the PhD, but just did music, for example, and then discovered alchemy. Now, I probably would have still found alchemy really interesting, but I wouldn't have had the confidence in it if I didn't have the scientific training, right? It was because I was so thoroughly indoctrinated in the science and I thought I knew it all. When I discovered alchemy, I'm like, oh, no, there's something much bigger here, something far superior to the science that I've been taught. And so that gave me a confidence to really push it and, to talk about it with other people. But I think if I didn't have that background, I wouldn't have had the confidence to talk about it. And I wouldn't have been so sure that it was good because I'd have been like, well, all the modern scientists, they've got it all figured out now, right? I would have trusted the science, you see. But because I had that experience, I knew that the science couldn't be trusted. So
you had mentioned a little earlier that you, in all of your training, your conventional educational training, you'd never heard about the soul or the spirit. And I had a very similar experience. What outside of alchemy, because I think you kind of eventually found that and felt resonant with it, but were there other experiences that gave you an awareness that there is a soul, there is a God, there is a spirit within each of us and within everything that is ready and willing to be expressed? Do you have some examples of how you moved from probably atheistic physicist to somebody who would consider themselves an alchemist and is very much in tune with the soul and spirit?
Yeah, well, I was atheist, agnostic, kind of upbringing, but I was always interested in the mysteries. So like, mysterious things like psychic phenomena, ghosts, and that kind of thing. I was always interested in that and interested in using science to explore that stuff. But it wasn't until probably around 2006, 2007, I had my first like ayahuasca experience. So I went down that whole road with exploring shamanic medicines, shamanic ceremonies. And, those were really profound, like life-changing experiences where, you have these inner visions, which are very hard to explain to people, just so like detailed and meaningful and colorful and geometric, like these like cathedrals of light that you're seeing inside your head, with your eyes covered. And, I'd wanted to see that and it really delivered. I was like, that's what drew me to checking out the ayahuasca. I wasn't really thinking about healing or anything at the time. I was thinking, I want to see these visions the shamans see. I'd seen the shamanic artwork and stuff like that. I was like, I want to see what they're seeing. But what took me by surprise was just the whole healing aspect of it. I didn't know much about healing at that time. And so being in these ceremonies, experiencing profound personal healing, physical, emotional, spiritual, but also hearing the healing stories of all the other people that are in and, hearing their personal stories of transformation as well. So yeah, this brought me to a point where I could no longer deny the existence of God or spirit or the soul, because I felt like I'd actually had a direct experience of it.
And do you think there's any way to, like, I know there are a lot of distortions and a lot of mistruths and outright, in some cases, lies within the conventional scientific community, but have you thought at all about how to reform the understanding of science so that we can infuse, soul, spirit, God back into what the masses consider quote unquote science?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. And I mean, in some sense, my book was like my first attempt to do that, but it's obviously it's not a formal thing. It's, it's a book, but I've been thinking about, people have been asking me about curriculums, for example, like to like redesign a science curriculum based on this and everything. I mean, that's obviously a lot of work, and there's no guarantee that any school or university is going to pick up the curriculum either. It's probably quite unlikely. But, I mean, I'm a little bit black-pilled in the sense of like changing the world. I'm not convinced that I can change the school system or change the university system. But I think what I can do is I can offer a helping hand to anybody who's lifting themselves out of that system. And that's what I'm trying to do, really, because a lot of people, are waking up. And it is an awakening, that is the correct term for it. Because to awaken is not just to come up from sleep, but it's to come up from deception. Awaken also means to realize you've been deceived. And so a lot of people are going through that, and they need some help, like a bridge that can help like bridge between like natural science and the synthetic science that they've been deceived by. And so I'm just trying to create that bridge. But I haven't set my sights on trying to fix the school system or the education system or whatever. That just seems like too big a task.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, trying to, the systems that are already in place, trying to fix them is probably too big of a task, and maybe just not a good use of energy. But what you're doing, writing your book and just putting this information out there as somebody who was very much in the system at like the highest levels that somebody could be in it, and coming out of it and saying, whoa, there is a lot wrong with what we're being taught. I think there's just so much power in that. And are you familiar with Rupert Sheldrake's work with morphic fields?
Yes,
so
yeah.
I think what is, we're in a really interesting time right now where there are a lot of people waking up to and becoming aware of the fact that there are these, mistruths that they've been sold as truths their whole life that don't seem to make sense and don't seem to help them live better lives. And I think that the more people that put energy into, as you said, sort of helping pull people out of those systems that are willing to remove themselves, like they're taking that responsibility for themselves, the stronger the fields of truth, which is a hard word to say, but I'll say truth because, I feel like what do we actually know is true? There's a lot of things that, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I thought were true that I don't anymore. But the morphic fields, or the fields of knowledge and power, and identifying with something that's greater than just materialism, I think we're strengthening that now with things like your book and, hopefully things like this conversation, where people looking to accept who they really are and step into who they really are and, what this place really is. There's, now there's a little bit more support for that. And I think we're all kind of walking with each other into what that really means for, how do we live here, and how do we create an experience of this life that feels really true to who we are and what we were meant to do here.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I got to a point during 2022, 2021 that I realized there was like nothing else to do except just speak authentically. It was like the only thing left. And at the same time, it was like all this stuff was being taken away from us, right? The world was being shut down. All the good things about life were being taken away or made worse. All the people who used to be your friends disappearing, like everything's going away. But the one thing they left us with was the internet, right? Your phone, your computer, the ability to connect with anyone in the world, the ability to research any topic, to learn anything. They left us with that. They took away everything else, left us with that. I thought, well, what else are we going to do except just talk about what's going on? But also, like, it's actually really powerful when a human being talks about their transformation. Someone who's been through a transformation, they were doing something, they were on the wrong path, they realized they were on the wrong path, they turned around, they went the other way. Now, when people speak about their personal stories of transformation, they become agents of transformation themselves. And I realized that during the pandemic and all that, was like actually the people who were coming up and speaking the truth about their personal stories of waking up and transformation. They were waking other people up. It was just like, and all they were doing was telling their story. That was it. All you have to do is just be authentic. And that kept coming to me during that time, was that's all you have to do, be authentic. And that will be enough. Now, that can be a very hard thing for people to do, right? To be authentic, especially if you have a job and all that kind of stuff. You have all these people depending on you, all these roles and everything. But I was in the fortunate position of not having had a job for 10 years and, just being so like detached from society that I could just talk about this stuff without too much fear. So
yeah, you were ahead of your time. I think you had your soul maybe knew how to extricate you from the system before you really needed to be.
Yeah, it was the 10 years of like being a full-time musician. And so I was like independent as well. So I didn't really I didn't have a record label boss or anything like breathing down my neck. I was like fully in charge of my own life kind of thing. So after that I was so sort of detached from, just worrying about what people think about me kind of stuff. Yeah, I was in a good position to share this information. Although, I was worried. I was afraid of ridicule and attack and all that. And, you get attacked sometimes. It's just part of it. Every so often I'll get like a really nasty message from someone. But it's just part of the... It's just part of the game now.
Yeah. And I think, it's hard for anyone that has spent a lot of time in these systems, and more, that's how people, especially in the Western world, we're directed into, this miseducational system, and you end up spending a lot of time there, a lot of money there, and it becomes, the more calcified those ideas become in your reality and in your world, the harder it is to break out of it. So I think the people that have kind of seen the other side, like yourself, and can show others the way, it's really important, because it can feel really isolating and really daunting to kind of step out of this big system. I know for myself, during the whole COVID era, when I first started questioning things, it was incredibly helpful for me to see other people doing the same thing, because otherwise you're just sort of, I'm in the middle of Canada here, little old me questioning, this doesn't make any sense. These aren't actually tests. Like a PCR isn't supposed to be a test, and you have all of these things running around in your head, and it does make such a big difference to know that there are other people like you who have maybe had similar experiences and come from similar educational backgrounds and are still able to see around that or see outside of it. And as much as there is this like power in individualizing and individuating your own thoughts, there is also so much strength and validity that comes from hearing similar things from other people that have been in your shoes. So I think, there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, I, started networking with people during the COVID years, other academics and so on who were, on the same page. And that was a very empowering experience. It was just a relief, such a relief just being able to talk to someone else who is, with you, because there was so much just against us at that time. And, as I said, I just realized that was like all I could do now. It was like I had to do, just say what I have to say. Yeah, I realized my initials are SAY as well.
Oh, wow. That's
I mean, I've
cool.
obviously known, yeah, I obviously I'd known that all my life that my initials were SAY, but it
Yeah,
never, the meaning of it didn't actually hit me till like 2022, and I was debating whether or not I should say
right.
anything about all this stuff, and then I realized my initials are SAY. Say I'm like, okay, right, I've got to
Yeah.
say something now. Like,
Yeah, and you in your book you talk about a I don't remember his name, but it's somebody that like from a numerological perspective, you have, I don't, that's definitely not my area of expertise, but like you share commonalities with somebody who lived a long time ago and sort of had like a similar path to yours as far as their development throughout
Mhm.
science. Do you mind just speaking to that a little bit and how you see some parallels with that man,
Sure, yeah. Well, it's a guy called Robert
Robert Flood?
Flood, Fludd. There's a book here.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, so I started looking into this guy 400 years ago. He was around and absolute genius. He did hundreds of drawings and wrote all these treatises on alchemy and music and astrology. And when I started looking into it, I couldn't believe like the intelligence of this man from like 400 years ago who had never heard of. He was completely written out of history because he was opposed to people like Kepler and of the time, all the people you have heard
yeah.
about from that time. He was in opposition to them, so you never hear about him. But he's got all these drawings and just amazing works. And yeah, I found all these like parallels between his life and my own. One of the most striking ones. Well, our
Yeah.
names were the same in numerology. When you added up all the numbers in the names, they were equal. But he had a nickname, an alias, which was Defluctibus, and this was like his nickname or like music alias, and it's Latin and it means of the flux. Of the flux. And of course, I've had head flux for like 20 odd years. And people used to call me the flux. They would actually call me the flux, like just when I was at gigs and stuff like that. And yeah, and then this guy, he did a degree in, it was a Masters of Art degree he did. And he studied like astrology and music and stuff. And then he went off on tour around Europe and he was playing music and, touring around Europe and stuff like that. And then he came back and then started working on his great work. And, my life was very similar. I went to university and then afterwards I became a musician. I went on tour around the world for a number of years as the Flux, right? And then, came back and started working on alchemy like later in life. And yeah, there's actually been a lot of other stuff has come up now, the more I investigate this guy. Now, I don't know if it's a reincarnation thing. I mean, that was my first thought. But I'm interested in this idea of like expression of an archetype. So rather than me necessarily being the reincarnation of Robert Flood, which some people have said to me, by the way, a number of people have said to me that I am him. But I'm not quick to believe that. But yeah, there's also this idea of like archetypes being expressed. So like archetypes can be expressed through different individuals, even though they're not the same soul. They're like bringing through similar archetypal qualities in their life. So whether I'm reincarnated or whether we're just of a similar archetype, I'm not sure, but there are loads of interesting parallels between our lives.
Yeah, that's so interesting to find out, like that you share so many similarities with this man who had a lot of impact in his time, although we don't recognize it now. And it's been sort of written out of our history. You were able to find him and find his work. And I agree, maybe you are him reincarnated, or maybe you are here to sort of live out in an archetypal way what he started 400 years ago. And speaking to that, your book, A Fool's Wisdom, you talk about the archetype of the fool and how we have these judgments about what a fool is, like somebody who's just silly or dumb or stupid. And actually there there's this other side to what a fool is, and it's really like, to encapsulate it, is maybe the archetype of an entertainer, or somebody that uses art to bring forth change or knowledge. And so do you mind speaking to that a little bit? And maybe if I'm not correctly explaining that or doing that justice, you could elaborate on it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, it's I came to realize the common thread with the fool was like playfulness. So I redefined it as one who plays, because, you know, there's some people who like play for a living, right? So like most people actually work for a living, but some of us actually play for a living, right? Whether you're a musician or even a sports person, or, you know, a dancer, or, you know, anything like that. When you're actually playing and that is your profession. So, you know, I realized that I'm a professional fool. That was what I was doing. And so there's this sort of esoteric and exoteric nature of the fool. Like, on the one hand, people see a fool and they see just a guy in colorful clothes, like dancing around and doing silly things, or making silly jokes, or saying things that are inappropriate that other people are too afraid to say. You know, comedians, of course, comics and all that, fools as well. But, you know, the fool isn't always stupid, though people may think they are, but it's actually, they're serving a role within the community, and an important role of, you know, showing people that which that they wouldn't see otherwise, right? It's like the fool lives life opposite to everybody else. And that's kind of how I felt as a, you know, DJ and producer, you know, going out to play shows and stuff. First of all, you're on the opposite side of the stage from everyone else, right? So everyone else at the party is there, and you're here on the other side of this, like, imaginary line, right? The stage. Yeah. So the fool, I actually found, was very empowering when I actually started to understand the archetype of the fool. You know, I'd been looking at tarot cards for years, and I realized that whilst I might have thought of myself as the magician, I actually really resonated mostly with the fool. You know, we like to think of ourselves maybe these higher cards, but, you know, I realized that just has so much in common with the fool. I mean, the fool, for example, is always depicted as stepping off the edge of a cliff while looking up to the sky. And, you know, that's symbolic of being, you know, focused on God, but also the leap of faith, just like walking off the edge of a cliff. And I really related to that, having the life that I'd had with, you know, essentially quitting my job to do music full time, to be the full-time fool, a full-time fool. And, you know, every time I would go to a gig, I was basically walking off the edge of a cliff. You know, I did not know, I would just go, and I didn't know the people. I didn't know where I was going. I was just like, again and again, I felt like the fool walking off the cliff, but I did it with complete faith, right? Which is why he's always looking up. He's, you know, his heart's full of faith. And as William Blake said, the fool who persists in his folly shall become wise. And, you know, I think just, I just developed the wisdom over the years of, you know, being a professionally committed fool, as it were, an entertainer. So yeah, it really brought things home for me. It made me feel like, you know, talking about the soul, it made me feel like I understood my soul really truly. It was like this is it. And so the tarot deck is the journey of the fool. Of the 21 cards, or the 22 cards, it's really the journey of the fool from a place of like ignorance to a place of knowledge of the world. So this polarity of the fool and the wise man is like a constant theme throughout alchemy and philosophy and stuff, because it really is. It's about our own development. You know, it's about the development of our own soul. Yeah,
and you just made an interesting point, or a comparison of, you know, as the fool, or in the archetype of the fool, you're living on almost like the flip side of mainstream society. So you're kind of doing the opposite, and then understanding the world from this, you know, flipped or opposed worldview. And I spoke with Mark Gober. Are you familiar with him?
Yes. Yeah. Mark Gober. Yeah.
Yeah. And he wrote this series of books called the Upside Down fill in the blank. So it's the Upside Down series. And it kind of, when you said that, it just struck a little bit of a parallel to me that, he wrote this series of books, and in it sort of is breaking down the lies and then what seems to be more true within, multiple realms of reality in our existence. And it just kind of parallels what you said in that, from this perspective of the quote unquote fool, where you're living a life that is upside down or very much, in opposition to what a conventional mainstream lifestyle might be, you get clarity about the world, and, the truths of reality seem like they're more in your face from that perspective, because you are really taking this stance that allows you to see things from a completely different perspective.
Yes, absolutely. It's and it helps, of course. So the existence of the fool within society helps people to see things from another perspective. If the fool was never there, if we didn't have the comedians and the dancers and the musicians and the people playing, if no one was playing and everyone was just seriously doing their thing, then you'd never really get that opposite point of view that's kind of needed to kind of become a whole person, right? To see things from, that other point of view. So yeah, I very much resonated with the fool, and I still do, although I have something of the wise man inside me as well now, I hope.
And Steve, do you have, for anyone listening, hoping to step into their own version of superhumanity and what that means for them? So just realizing their potential while they're here. Do you have any advice from, the path that you've been on and the things that you've learned over time that you maybe feel could be helpful for somebody in that place?
Well, I would just say that, there's real power in solitude. And I don't mean loneliness, of course. I mean solitude, which is like quality time with yourself. And like when I made this cabin, for example, which I built in my garden, this was to be my music studio and my space for studying alchemy and everything. This has just become such a great space for me. When I come here, it's like, you're just by yourself, but you have everything you need around you. And having that contemplative space to learn and think and is really valuable. That's how you get to know yourself. That's how your soul has a chance to come forth. If you're always around other people, you're always being told to think this or told to do that or whatever, it's like the soul becomes like withered. But if you actually give yourself some solitude, time to contemplate and learn and practice creative things, writing, music, whatever, the soul starts to come out, and it's really about bringing out what's inside of you. So, I would recommend making time for solitude and study and creativity.
Yeah, I love that recommendation. And I've just, in my own life, I felt the power of that over time, especially being in a position and in a profession where, on a daily basis, I am around people all the time. I think just becoming and getting comfortable being quiet with yourself and being able to speak to yourself and listen to yourself, there is just this like very quiet power in all of those things.
Yes,
so I
yeah,
absolutely agree. Well, thank you, Steve, so much for your time today and sharing everything you have about not only your book, but your life and your work. And I just very much appreciate this conversation and appreciate you putting out there into the world the things that you have, because you have a very unique perspective and you come, both professionally and spiritually from a unique place. And that's something that we need right now in the world.
Well, thank you very much. No, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been wonderful talking to you. And I'll maybe see you again in the future.
Yeah. Excellent.